the Jewish Federation of Northwest Indiana for sponsoring this event. They've been very helpful for providing us the money, even if it's honorarium, just, whatever the sum is, it doesn't matter. Their support is very valuable. And Mickey just happened to be here today, and he's the vice president of the federation, and we thank you. Thank you. Let me tell you a little bit about our speakers. Eileen and Richard Sheffer, Dr. Eileen and Richard Sheffer, live in Edwardsburg, Michigan. They're very good friends of ours, and also they developed friendships with several of our members who traveled to Israel with them 2 summers ago. So they know quite a few people here. Eileen Sheffer is the Vice Chancellor of Public Affairs and University Advancements at Indiana University South Bend. And Rick was a marketing director for Hess Engineering in Niles, Michigan. Now he's happily retired. Eileen and Rick are a wonderful couple, and it turns out they have a very special relationship with Rwandan immigrants who escaped the Rwandan Genocide some 20 years ago and ended up going to college in Southwest Michigan, where Eileen was an administrator at the time. The friendship between the Sheffers and the Rwandans has endured through the years. Today, you will hear an amazing story. This past summer, many of her former students gathered together to offer the Sheffers a trip to Rwanda. Now, I don't want to give away the story, but let's put it this way. In Jewish tradition, it is said that whoever saves one life, it's as if they have saved an entire world. Based on that standard, Ilene Sheffer has saved many worlds. Since their return from Rwanda, they have given lectures about their friendship with the young Rwandan refugees and how the recent visit affected them. We are fortunate in having the Sheffers speak to us about their experience. Please welcome Eileen and Rick Sheffer.
Good morning. I'm kind of the warm-up act for Eileen. In order to better understand the Rwanda Genocide, it is important to have an insight into the history of the country and the background that led to such a horrendous event. Rwanda is a small country about the size of the state of Maryland, located in Central Africa, surrounded by the countries of Uganda to the north, Tanzania to the east, Burundi to the south, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo to the west. It is a mountainous country with elevations ranging from 3,000 feet above sea level to a height of 14,000 feet at the volcanoes. The country enjoys 2 rainy seasons, a mild climate with occasional frost or snow in the mountains, and because the country is located just south of the equator, the temperature is constant year-round, with daytime highs in the low 80s and the evening lows in the mid-60s. Yeah.
San Diego.
The earliest inhabitants of the region are generally thought to have been the Twa, a group of pygmy forest hunters and gatherers whose descendants still live in the Rwanda today. The Twa were partially supplanted by the immigration of 2 ethnic groups known as the Hutus and the Tutsis. The Hutus and the Tutsis had organized themselves into small states, and in the 19th century, the states became organized as a kingdom ruled by a Tutsi king. The king was treated as a semi-divine being responsible for making the country prosperous. All the people of Rwanda were expected to pay tribute to the king, and the tribute was collected by Tutsi administrative hierarchy. Besides ethnic identity, a person was considered a Tutsi if he owned 10 or more cows. But the distinction between the ethnic groups was somewhat fluid, in that Tutsis who lost their cattle due to disease or epidemic were sometimes also considered Hutu. Likewise, Hutu who obtained cattle could become considered Tutsi, and thus climbing the ladder of the social strata. The first Europeans to set foot in Rwanda was a German, Count Gustav Adolf von Goetzen, who in 1893 led an expedition through Rwanda and meeting the king at his palace. The palace was a big grass hut, by the way. Around 1897, German colonialists and missionaries began arriving in Rwanda, and the German Empire assumed colonial claims to the region. During this period, many Europeans had become obsessed with race, and this had an impact on Rwanda. The Germans believed that the Tutsis, the ruling class, was a superior racial group, and thus more European than Hutu. Because of their seemingly taller stature and quote-unquote more eloquent personalities, and their willingness to convert to Roman Catholicism, the colonists, including the most powerful Roman Catholic officials, favored the Tutsis, who at the time were about 15 to 16% of the population. They were put in charge of the farming Hutus and were given basic ruling positions. After the outbreak of World War I, small forces of Europeans fought for control of the region. The Belgians advanced from the Congo into Germany's East African colonies, quickly forcing the German forces out. At the end of World War I, Belgium governed Rwanda as part of their Belgian Congo Empire. The Belgian government continued to rely on the Tutsi power structure for administration of the colony, including making the colony profitable. They introduced coffee as a commodity crop. Due to the eugenics movement in Europe and the United States in the 1920s, the Belgian colonial government became concerned with the differences between the Hutu and the Tutsis. Belgian ethnologists analyzed thousands of Rwandans on racial criteria, which would be used later by the Nazis. These measurements included nose shapes, skull size, the latter of which was believed to represent brain size. Tutsi skulls were bigger, they were taller, and their skin was lighter. As a result of this, Europeans came to believe that Tutsis and had Caucasian ancestry and were thus superior to the Hutus. Through this method, ethnic identity was officially mandated, and administrative documents systematically detailed each person's ethnicity. And every Rwandan was issued an ethnic identity card, which defined one as legally Hutu or Tutsi. The Roman Catholic Church, the primary educators in the country, subscribed to and reinforced the differences between the Hutu and the Tutsi. They developed separate educational systems for each, and by the 1940s and 1950s, the vast majority of students were Tutsi. The Belgian institution of ethnic identity cards contributed to the growth of group identities. Belgium introduced electoral representation for Rwandans by means of secret ballot, and a majority of the Hutus made enormous gains within the country. In the 1950s and 1960s, a wave of revolution swept through Central Africa, and socialist platform of African unity and equality for all Africans was promoted. A Hutu emancipation movement arose in 1957, predicated on a Hutu manifesto, and a militarized Hutu party was organized. In reaction, 2 years later, the Tutsis formed the UNAR party, lobbying for immediate independence for Rwanda based on the existing Tutsi monarchy. Both groups became militarized, and skirmishes began between the two peoples. In July of 1959, the Tutsi king died following a routine vaccination, and some Tutsis thought that he had been assassinated by the government led by the Hutus. His younger brother became the next king. Later that year, conflicts between the Tutsis and Hutus set off a wave of violent retaliation against the Tutsis called the Wind of Destruction. Hutus killed an estimated 20,000 to 100,000 Tutsis. Thousands more, including the king, fled to neighboring Uganda before Belgian commandos arrived to quell the violence. Some 150,000 Tutsis were exiled to neighboring countries. Tutsis who remained in Rwanda were excluded from political power, in a state becoming more centralized under the Hutu power structure. In 1960, democratic municipal elections were held in Rwanda. The Hutu majority elected Hutu representatives. Such changes ended the Tutsi monarchy, which had existed for centuries. Parliamentary elections were held, and the first Rwandese republic was declared, with a Hutu as president and a Hutu as the prime minister. Over the next several years, Tutsi guerrilla groups staged attacks into Rwanda from neighboring countries. Rwandan Hutu-based troops responded, and thousands more were killed in the clashes. The new Hutu administration established quotas to try to increase the number of Hutus in schools and in the civil services. This effort ended up penalizing the Tutsis. They were allowed only 9% of secondary school and university seats, which was purported to be their proportion of the population. Quotas were also extended to the civil service jobs. With unemployment high, competition for such opportunities increased ethnic tensions. The government also continued the colonial policy of requiring ethnic identity cards, and it discouraged mixed marriages. Following more violence in 1964, the government suppressed political opposition, it banned the political parties, and excluded Tutsi membership. Hutu militants used the term cockroaches as a pejorative to describe the Tutsi rebels for what was perceived as infiltrating the country. Hundreds of thousands of Tutsi refugees moved to the neighboring countries. In 1974, a public outcry developed over Tutsi overrepresentation in professional fields, such as medicine and education. Thousands of Tutsis were forced to resign from such positions, and many were forced into exile. Many exiled refugee Rwandan Tutsis who were in Uganda had joined the rebel forces in the Uganda Brush War, and had then become part of the Uganda military upon the rebel victory in 1986. Among these was Paul Kagame, who rose to prominence in the Rwanda Patriotic Front, RPF. He was a Rwanda rebel group that largely consisted of Tutsi veterans of the Uganda War. Today, this gentleman is the president of Uganda. On April 6, 1994, the Hutu government and the Tutsi rebels reached a settlement on the Rwanda War. The airplane returning from the peace accords and carrying the president of Rwanda and the Hutu president of Burundi was shot down as it prepared to land in Kigali, the capital. Both presidents were killed when the plane crashed. The Hutu believed the plane was shot down by the Tutsi RPF, who denied it, but the die was cast. Military and militia groups began immediately rounding up and killing Tutsis en masse, as well as political moderates, irrespective of their ethnic background. The killing swiftly spread from Kigali to all corners of the country. Between April 6 and the beginning of July, a 90-day period, a genocide of unprecedented swiftness occurred when between 800,000 and 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus were dead at the hands of organized bands of militia and rebels. Even ordinary citizens were called on by local officials to kill their neighbors. The killing of the genocide represented over 10% of the entire population of the country. Thousands of people were herded into soccer stadiums and systematically killed. Tutsis were told to go to this particular school that was in the country where they would be safe. Once the schoolyard was filled, they were systematically killed. It is estimated that 50,000 Tutsis were shot or macheted at this single location. Today, this is a memorial to the fallen, where schoolroom after schoolroom in this building are skeleton remains as a striking reminder of what happened here. And when we walk through these, the smell, the remains, I mean, it's awful. In summarizing my background presentation, I'd like to play a recording by Gervais, who was our guide and one of Eileen's students. And he had a story, and I'm not sure you can hear it when he tells it, so I'm going to describe it first, and then maybe you can hear it. The audio isn't real good. But he was our tour guide, one of Eileen's students, who confronted one of his best friends growing up. So he lived in a village, a small village. They knew everybody in the village. This was considered his best friend growing up. And Gervais was here in the States when the genocide occurred. After the genocide, he returned to live back in Rwanda. And his friend was in prison for a period of time because of what he did during this time. He approached this person after he was out of prison, and he said to him, "Did you kill my mother? Did you kill my father?" And he said, "No, Gervais, I swear I didn't kill your parents." He said, "But you did kill, didn't you?" And he said, "Yes, I did kill." He said, "How could you do that? You knew all of us. We were family." And he said, "Well," he said, "they came and took me away, and the first day they made me kill." And he said, "Maybe I killed 3 people." He said, "The next day they came again, and I killed. And maybe I killed 5 people." He said, "By the 5th day, it didn't bother me. That first day, he said he'd go to bed at night, throw up. He was sick. He was despondent. But by the 5th day, he said, I slept good. I was okay." And he said, after that, he said, if I didn't kill, I felt uncomfortable. So if you'll click that, you may be able to hear it.
He's not talking yet. Or you've spoken to him.
Yeah, but the audio isn't coming up.
Yeah.
Oh, darn. Well,
Just click forward then.
yeah, click forward. But that was his story, and that's basically what he was saying on the script. And now I'm going to turn this over to Eileen's presentation, which picks up in 1994, or before 1994, but it's in the same era regarding the genocide.
And you want to make sure you just get to the, I'll wait until you get to the next photo. Just see the Tober can advance into the next one. Got it. My story starts in 1985 when I was Dean of Admissions at Southwestern Michigan College in Dowagiac, Michigan. I had just made the transition into college university work, and besides being dean, I had also had the collateral appointment of International Student Advisor. And to just put it into context, Southwestern Michigan College is a community college with about 3,000 students with a transfer program to 4-year colleges and universities, and it's located in Dowagiac, Michigan, a pastoral rural community about 35 minutes from South Bend. At the time of taking on this position, I had an opportunity very early on to meet with a student from Andrews University, Etienne Musanera. Etienne was at Andrews because he was Seventh-day Adventist, and he came from Rwanda and had done some research on the Michigan community college system. He was pleased to see that they had a very good transfer reputation, and transferability to a 4-year institution was seamless. So comparing the cost of a private 4-year private education with a 2-year community college, it was a way to get a good education and save money. In Indiana, 1991 was the first year that you really had a community college system. In Michigan, it began in about 1959. You know about Ivy Tech within your state, but it was very technically minded and not a transfer program up until about maybe 12 years ago. When Etienne visited me in the fall of 1985, we had an easy rapport, and it was soon thereafter that sisters, brothers, cousins, and friends started to make the pilgrimage from Rwanda to southwestern Michigan. Eventually, we had 45 students simultaneously attending Southwestern Michigan College. It was sort of amazing when the ambassador from Rwanda in 1988 did a check on his countrymen in America, only to find that Southwestern Michigan College had more Rwandese students than any other college in the United States. At that time, I was recognized by the Rwandan ambassador, as well as the president of Andrews University, for our commitment to students from Rwanda. Also, the I-20 paperwork procedure for gaining admissions at a college in the United States was a complicated system, requiring a lot of details that the students had to navigate. Not only did students need to show that they had valid educational credentials from high school, they also needed to prove that they had the financial resources to cover 2 years of tuition, room and board, and other incidental expenses. For Tutsis, and all of my students except one were Tutsi, a college education was virtually not possible in Rwanda. Their parents knew that without coming to the United States, a chance of a college degree just would not happen. And so it was considered a badge of success to get that I-20 and come to the United States. Things were pretty much stable until 1991, when civil unrest was beginning in Rwanda, and at that point no new students were coming in from the country. It also should be known that in 1991 I was promoted to vice president at Southwestern Michigan College and headed community services as well as development, and no longer day-to-day had that contact with international students. However, on that fateful morning in April of 1994, several of my students and former students began receiving calls from friends or relatives in Belgium, where several family members had fled. They called family and friends in the United States to say that a civil war was going full tilt in Rwanda and that family members were being killed or would be killed. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, and uncles were dying by the tens of thousands. Many of the Tutsis were trying to get out of the country, but it was a horrendous situation. Thousands of people were herded into large soccer stadiums and murdered with guns and machetes, like Rick had shown you. There was very poor intelligence on the situation in Rwanda available in this country, for very little information was coming out of the United Nations. Therefore, there was absolutely nothing being reported on American TV or in the newspapers about what was happening in Rwanda. Based on the frantic calls from some of my former students, I organized and conducted a meeting at the conference room at Southwestern Michigan College. All of the students' money had been summarily cut off, while simultaneously losing their family members. It was a state of chaos, and we needed to help these students as they were literally stranded in this country. I called Fred Upton, who was the U.S. House of Representatives member that represented the Dowagiac district, and he still is the U.S. House of Representative person today. We tried to gain more information about what was happening. The intelligence pulled together by Upton's staff offered little insight into the situation, or even the fact that a civil war was taking place. However, some of the students were very aware that Canada had moved very quickly and was acknowledging that a civil war was happening, and they were offering political asylum. And so some of my students and former students left for Canada, where they believed that they would be safe. Also, to put it into context, in 1995, when I started at Southwestern Michigan College, there were 57 international students out of 3,000. And by the time the Civil War started in 1994, there were 138 international students.
You started in 84, not 94. You said 94.
But that's 85. And we had at that point a total of 138 international students, and 45 still had ties to Rwanda. At this point, I should also give you some background about some of the students. Although I was out of international student advising day to day, I still had stayed in touch with many of my former students. I had gone to their weddings, I had helped them as they needed letters of recommendation for four-year schools as they transferred, like Etienne, who had come in 85, and he was well on his way for a master's and then a doctoral degree. Also, you need to know the amazing gift and the amazing grit and perseverance of these students. Many of them came in with very rudimentary English-speaking skills. They were fluent in French, and they were also fluent in their Rwandese dialect. But they had phenomenal math skills because their formal education was a European educational system. So even though the Rwandese students came in needing English as a second language, they were easily able to take calculus. We often laugh when we look back to the late 1980s, as the calculus classes at this community college had the highest level quality student before or after because of these amazing Rwandese students. Dowagiac had proximity to South Bend, and there was a small window that allowed students living in Michigan to go to Indiana for in-state tuition, even if they were international students. It made it very, very affordable for these 45 students to be able to finish college, and this no longer exists for international students. The other group of students could finish their bachelor's degree through a program with Ferris State University. Now, Ferris State is in the upper lower peninsula in Big Rapids, Michigan, but since 1985, they had an extension in Dowagiac, Michigan that still exists today, and many of those students remain living in Cass County to finish their bachelor's degree. And I might add that every one of the Rwandese students I work with graduated from Southwestern Michigan College, 45 for 45, and 95% of them continued their college education, completing their bachelor's degrees. I have to tell you, after being at IU South Bend for 9 years, we don't have those kinds of wonderful statistics. Many of these students came to IUSB where I work today, so it was sort of meant that we would reconnect all over again, and the majority that stayed either have master's degrees or have gone on for specialist or doctoral degrees. The students not only lost family and worried about losing life and limb, there was also a terrible fear of deportation, which would have meant certain death because they were Tutsis. In addition, with family gone, there would be a lack of funds to stay afloat for living expenses and their education. So in short, this time was utter chaos. So on that fateful day in 1994, the students came to me to help untangle this mess and try to keep them safe. Shortly thereafter, I received a call from the same Rwandese ambassador who had honored me and the president of Andrews University for our work in encouraging higher education for Rwandese students. This ambassador is Hutu. The ambassador wanted the names and addresses, past and present, of all of the students from Rwanda who were attending Southwestern Michigan College. This included 1985 forward to 1994. Now today we have something called FERPA, Federal Right to Privacy, where no employer is able to give out private information and could be sent to jail for doing so. But in 1994, that law did not exist, or certainly was not enforced. My reaction was one of protection for these students. I did not feel that I did anything particularly special. I just did what was right. To give the names to the Hutu ambassador, who was one of the ethnic group perpetrating the genocide, would mean that these students would be sent home and sent to their certain death. So I refused and was fortunately supported by my college president. Shortly thereafter, the ambassador's call, I received a call from the FBI. They wanted to see if I was harboring criminals, and they wanted to check if, in essence, I was subversive. They also gave unexpected visits to the housing units of some of the Rwandese students who were still living in private housing in Michigan, because allegedly the Hutu ambassador reported that these students were doing things illegal, suggesting the dealing of drugs or using drugs, which would also get them deported. The FBI literally broke down their doors, busted into their homes, and found nothing more subversive than college textbooks. These were honorable, law-abiding students that wanted to get a good education and were very successful in the classroom. Fortunately, no further action was taken by the FBI. But without funds from home, many of these students needed to work. Without a green card, they could not work in this country, except if it was tied to campus credits or campus jobs. However, if students could get work in their chosen career field, they could legally earn money doing what was considered co-op work. And so I worked to find paid co-op jobs for about a third of the students. Fortunately, at that time, nursing homes were hiring, and it was tough getting good help. So I suppose if I stretched any window of opportunity, I did it here. As I rationalized, it didn't matter what their major was, working in a nursing home would further their career aspirations. If they were a business major, a nursing home was a business. If they were looking at nursing as a career, obviously this would be good training. And if they were going to be a psychologist, what better way to study the human experience than in a nursing home? You get my drift. We used to chuckle and say that during this period from 1994 to 1996, there was never a shortage of excellent help in the area nursing homes thanks to the quality of the Rwandese working population in the area. And when I gave this talk with Rick at IU South Bend, we had a panel afterwards with a lot of my former students who are now in their late 40s, and only 2 in that group of 45 became nurses. So they were in the audience that day, but we had a good chuckle because no one else was a nurse. After the events in 1994, the Michiana Rwandese community coalesced into a very strong support system. Beginning in 1995, a genocide memorial was held every year at either Notre Dame or Indiana University South Bend, with more than 150 people attending annually. The gathering provided the students, the former students, their spouses, and now their families a time to remember the horror that had happened and to swear that nothing like this would ever happen again. Very reminiscent of the Nazi genocide that we all know so well. Also, these former students met wonderful friends in the Michiana area, and it was a way to educate their new Michiana friends about what had happened. In 2005, when I was working at IU South Bend as Vice Chancellor, I had reconnected with many of my former students that settled in the South Bend area. And at that time, the movie Hotel Rwanda had opened to critical acclaim. We started communicating via email to one another about the movie, the story it told, and whether it was an accurate portrayal, which it was not. We then decided to have a reunion with the students that either started at SMC or had finished at Indiana University South Bend. And that's what this next picture shows. Today, most of my students are married with families of their own, and over 100 came to our home to do this reunion with one another, some coming from Canada and the greater Detroit area. I'm very proud of our reunion photos shown here at the time, and my students presented me with a very humbling award of appreciation, which I value greatly. The inscription on the award reads as follows: 2005, Dr. Ilene Sheffer, thank you for being counselor, teacher, guide, and mentor to all of us. Thank you for caring so much. Thank you for all of your help. We will always remember you. We will carry you in our hearts forever and ever. Rwandese Community, SMC, IUSB. Very sweet. Rick and I have gone to many of the April Rwandese genocide memorials, and I will never forget in 2005 when all of these children, some 15 to 20, came one by one. These are the children of my former students, and each handed me a flower symbolizing the lives they felt I helped saved. They often refer to me as Grandma, a very tender, sweet connection, as they have lost their blood grandparents who would have loved them dearly. My former students encouraged us to visit Rwanda, for they're so proud of the progress their country has made since the genocide. But the time never seemed right for Rick and me to mesh our personal and professional lives with such a grand trip. But in 2010, the new ambassador, James Kamonyo, came to Michiana to attend that year's Rwandan memorial event. He asked that Rick and I join him for dinner and formally invited us to come to Rwanda this past summer. As of that time, the trip began to take shape. And you see the picture of Etienne Musinera, my first student in 1985. He's now a PhD professor at Mercer College in Atlanta, and said that he would be our escort for the trip. We set up a week in July where we could travel together and see the country that all of my students love so much. At that time, we looked at a whirlwind 8-day trip and also saw that airline tickets with the high costs of fuel were nearly $3,000 each, or $6,000 for tickets for the two of us. This cost was before we could even have an opportunity to consider hotels, sightseeing, and all the things we would want to do while we were there. Etienne coordinated the trip with former students Gaten Gatete, who works at AM General, and Protace, who's back in Rwanda. Gaten is an IUSB graduate working at AM General as an IT person, and he was on the panel that we had when we did this several weeks ago. And Protes lives in Rwanda and is a very, very successful businessman. They quietly told us there was a surprise attached to the trip. We thought it was probably a special student with all of my former students who went back to Rwanda to live. They would probably host us maybe with some governmental dignitaries. But we didn't realize that there was a Team USA Canada and a Team Rwanda competing against each other for a special gift they wanted to give us. And we were overwhelmed that the students together, all 45 of them, had contributed $6,000 towards our trip. No one has ever done anything like this for Rick or me in our whole lives, and needless to say, we were overwhelmed. In essence, our airline tickets were covered by our students, and they made it possible for us to make this a 2-week trip, allowing us to circumnavigate the entire country. We visited the savannas, the local markets, the local communities and cities, and experienced the exquisite beauty of this wonderful country. And that brings us to Rwanda today. It's a magnificent country. It has everything you would ever want in beauty. Stunning mountains, volcanoes, and the savannas with its lush vegetation. There are no starving children. Whether you travel to the smallest, poorest village or the capital of Kigali, children are well-fed, healthy, and physically very active. We saw beautifully terraced individual family farm plots done by hand, covering the hills and valleys of the countryside, reminiscent of tapestry or a piece of artwork. As my husband had mentioned before, it's almost like a Thomas Jefferson farming utopian society. 90% of the people grow their own food for subsistence, and any surplus is sold at the market for cash to purchase the other essentials they need, like clothes or tools. There is virtually no litter or garbage along the roads or streets. We're amazed at how clean the cities and the countryside were, because everything is sustainable, everything's used, there's no waste. For instance, firewood for cooking has become scarce, so the government developed a stove that runs on methane gas generated by cow manure. Since most families have a cow, it's a very good solution for a diminishing resource. Women all leave home at about 4:30 in the morning, walking 5 to 10 miles each way to the village with a basket on their head, and they would have their food surplus there with other wares, coming back with a basket that hopefully was empty at the end of the day. And even though technology needs to grow rapidly there, everyone has a cell phone. Their cell phone is their alarm clock, and it also is their music. So as they walk the 5 to 10 miles, they're entertained on their walking to market. I think we saw only one overweight person in the 2 weeks we were in Rwanda. Everyone looks like a model for a fitness magazine with beautifully erect posture, slim bodies, and muscular arms and legs. It is nothing to see children 4 or 5 years old at daybreak before they go to school carrying bundles of sticks for firewood or carrying anything from a 2 to a 5-gallon jerry can strapped on their back, going from the village to the well, back to home. These are their jobs, and they do it before and after school. Everyone does their share. There was a saying we heard numerous times on our trip, in Rwanda we do what we have to do, not what we want to do. In a city like the capital of Kigali, the hotels were beautiful, state-of-the-art. However, they were very expensive. With only a few available, it was not uncommon for Rick and I to spend $400 a night for lodging. However, tourism is growing. You see a lot of construction on hotels, and the cost will definitely come down. These 3 students that you'll see on the page are all brothers that we visited with Rwanda, and they are all my former students. Our guide is Gervais, who Rick talked to you about with the interview that he had. He finished an automotive program while at Southwestern Michigan College, and today he owns a successful safari tour business. He has one of the few Land Cruisers that's air-conditioned, so we were told a couple weeks before our trip he always takes the executive. So we sat on the seats that Natalie Portman sat on and Bill and Melinda Gates. So I thought that was sort of neat. His insights into the genocide and aftermath were invaluable to our understanding and appreciation of the country's trauma. His brother Proteus, in the middle, is an industrialist who builds office buildings, apartment buildings, and governmental structures. He also owns his own private school in Kigali, and he was moving into a home last Thanksgiving, actually this Thanksgiving, that cost $400,000 American dollars. So revenge is sweet. And the third brother, Antoine, is a cabinet minister in President Kagame's government. During our 2 phenomenal weeks, we traveled to Ngunwe Lodge to experience a tea plantation and stay in the lodge facilities, the actual lodge that President Kagame had stayed in on one of his visits. It was absolutely phenomenal. We saw the Tutsi Palace of the King of Rwanda and were entertained by native dancers. We were in the Volcano Mountains and enjoyed the golden monkeys playing at the edge of the forest. And that picture Rick took, he was only maybe 6 feet away from the monkeys. But the most amazing part of the trip is the Gorillas of the Mist. And amazingly, we spent an hour with the Gorillas of the Mist watching and taking pictures. As guides cut swaths through the thick jungle foliage, mountain gorillas, including the Big Daddy Silverback leader, meandered within 10 feet of us, eating bamboo, lounging around, and playing like regular families. It was the highlight of a trip and just an absolutely world-class experience. Here is a short video that I hope will play of this amazing experience of spending time with the mountain gorillas. Are they moving? Good. Yes. On the Rwanda side of the mountain, there are 13 families of gorillas. The trackers keep track of where each gorilla family spent the night. In the morning, guides with groups of only 8 tourists trek up on the volcano and through very thick bamboo cover to where each family group is feeding. And Rick took all these photos. This is how close we were. When we got near them, we stopped, and one by one the gorillas just ambled down through our group. The gorillas actually ignored us, continuing their feeding, playing, and grooming. We saw 13 of the 26 gorillas in our group that we had visited with the Big Daddy Silverback, males, females, and little twin babies. Absolutely amazing. Again, a very expensive part of the trip. It was $500 each to be able to have this experience, but absolutely well worth it. We are also relaxed at a beautiful Lake Kuvu, watched the baboons who played outside there. And these are actual pictures that we took on our little flip camera, where we went to the savannah, clicking away with giraffes, impalas, zebras, water buffalo, hippopotamus. It was all pretty amazing. On the professional side, we met with the president of Kigali Technical Institute, Jean-Jacques Muajama, where we discussed the possibility of developing a relationship with IU South Bend. We also met with Antoine, one of the 3 brothers who was the Minister of Disaster Relief. And as I mentioned earlier, he was one of my students. It truly was a trip of a lifetime. This particular night where we had the reunion dinner, we were hosted by my former students at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the lights of Kigali. 6 of the 7 returned to Rwanda in 1994 to build their lives very successfully. They have all married and they all have children of their own. Etienne, the one who traveled with us, who lives in Atlanta, is building a retirement home in Kigali, and we got to see it. So every time he has a little bit of extra money, another part of the house is built, but it's pretty wonderful. We ended a trip on a somber note. Our last stop was at the Kigali Memorial Center in the capital of Rwanda. This is the most extensive memorial documenting the 1994 Rwandan genocide. What makes it most emotional is the chronicling of other genocides throughout history, such as the Armenians, World War II Jewish Holocaust, Darfur, Somalia, and of course Rwanda. The human skulls, photographs, and clothing of the deceased were powerfully displayed side by side with beautiful pieces of art that in some way told a horrific story. But the most chilling display highlighted 8 beautiful deceased children with their simple stories written on individual plaques. As an example, my name is Patrick, I'm 3 years old, my favorite toy is my teddy bear. My last memory is seeing my mother macheted across her neck. Time and time again, the final moment of death was told from the perspective of the little child. I was reduced to sobs, and this personalization was brutally shared in a verbal and graphic form. In conclusion, I'd like to restate that I never considered in 1994 that I did anything heroic or notable. I just did what I thought was the right thing to do. However, in retrospect, the lesson my former students reinforced with me is that doing the right things for others may be the greatest gift you can give to the world. And said another way, to save one life is to save mankind. I hope you appreciate the fortitude that these students had. It was a wonderful experience for us, and I feel my relationship with these 45 students has given me so much more than I possibly could have given them. And then I would take any questions.
I have a question about the flag. Their flag caught my eyes, and I wonder when they adopted it, because, you know, the colors and the sun in the corner, it's like they're looking up for a brighter future. Do you know when?
I don't know the answer. Do you know, Rick? I don't think we saw it, so I don't know if it existed before. Of course, they were the Belgian Congo before, but I really don't know. Bob?
Well, as a follow-up, can you talk about the process of reconciliation?
Yeah, that is really amazing, because that is just countrywide. President Kagame was a Tutsi. Now your ID cards do not say Tutsi or Hutu, it says Rwandan. And all of the Tutsis are really asked to meet with the people who killed their families and killed their friends. And there are films on it and stories on it. And you know, from my perspective and Rick's perspective, you know, we don't understand how your heart could be that big to be able to do that. But President Kagame feels there is no other way to move forward without being able to do that. But when you go to markets and you go to areas away from the city, which clearly are all Hutus, our guide said that he felt very uncomfortable. He still feels people look at him thinking, like, how come you're alive? Or how come you're here? And all of my students, the ones who are upper middle class or even just lower middle class, they all have a night watchman, someone that'll wash their car during the day but stays awake at night. So there's still a degree of distrust that with what they went through, perhaps this could happen again. And I use the word wary. I think they still remain wary there, although they say it's safe.
So what is the population right now?